guitar. Today we're going to talk about pivoting. We just came off of the Prelude 15A where we broke up the chords from Prelude 15 and put them into arpeggio motion. So now at 58 we're going to be talking about pivot and guide fingers. And so what that means is basically up until this point, we've learned some pretty fundamental techniques that, whatever note's in the first fret, you're going to use the first finger, whatever note is in the second fret, you're going to use the second finger, whatever note's in the third fret, you're going to use the third finger, until we got to like G and D, where we started using our fourth finger recently so that we have our other fingers accessible for lower notes. Now we're going to kind of abandon a little bit that rule and say that that was mostly just a guideline, because pivoting and guiding fingers are going to help us keep smooth sound, to not chop up the notes, right? So a pivot finger is one which remains stationary while other fingers are moved to form new notes. We learned about this when we were doing chords, right? Like, for example, E minor to C, that second finger. That second finger is the pivot note, right? The second finger doesn't get picked up at all in that process. C to D7, that first finger over here is the pivot. And then a guide finger does not entirely leave the string when moving up or down to a new note, right? So a guide finger is like when we went from D7 to G, where fingers 1 and 2 moved. The third finger just slid over to the third fret, and that was ready, right? So you've already done pivot fingers and guide fingers in the context of chords. If you think all the way back to that beginner guitar progression, right? The E minor, or C, I think we did it starting from C, like C, D7, and then G, E minor. That's if you do it with the... It's that Coldplay song that uses it, and then there's a different song that starts with E minor, and so on. 4-chord songs could be so many different songs depending on what order you play them in and what rhythm you give them. So just going through this quick paragraph over here and progressing from the second to the third measures in Prelude 16, the second and third fingers remain lightly upon their respective strings and shift the distance from one fret to the next. It says lightly because we don't want to hear a slide, right? That shouldn't. So, for example, here C to B is what it's talking about, using the third finger. We don't want to hear... If you slow that down, you would have heard something like... Right? So what we want to do is do that lightly and simultaneously... If I do it slowly, you kind of hear it like that, as opposed to, right? So we're not push down hard enough to hear the note. We just want to lift and put it down without actually detaching from the string. And then we're just skipping ahead to this part right here. Never lift a finger until necessary. That's what's going to help us create that smooth transition. The smooth transitions are what give that big sound to the guitar when the notes ring out as long as possible. Okay, so this paragraph right over here is going to go over some of those details. We can go ahead and start looking at them together. First of all, form. I see fine right here in the middle. That means the end of the song is here. If I go all the way to the end, DC al fine, dal capo al fine, right? So to the top until the end. So I know that the form of the song plays all the way through to the bottom, back to the top, and then it ends over here. Technique and all that good stuff we'll get into major detail in the next lesson. Today I just want to go over kind of the chords, right? So I have an A and then A, C, E, so I know this is going to be like an A minor chord. Those are the notes that I need to play. The next one, see how A is on the 2 right there? I'm probably going to preface that from the beginning. I don't want to play it like this or like this if I need to use that third finger for something else. So I'm already playing A, C, and E with those fingers there. Okay, and then I add my third finger to the note C. And then notice that 3 and 2 both shift from C and A down to B and G sharp, and B and E become open. And then the chord block is the same, just the bass note changes. So the first 4 measures look like this. Chords. This is like A minor with a changing bass. And this is like E major with a changing bass. It's like D7 or E7 because it's got the D, but you notice that the chord block stays the same. The only thing that's changing is the bass note from B to E to B to D, but it's the same chord. So as long as I'm holding these two notes, I should be fine. So your first line chords, A minor with a C as the low note, E major with the B as the low note, E major with the E as the low note, E major again with the B as the low note. So we just did that one. Now with the D as the low note, that makes that an E7 chord. And then, again, look for repetition. We've seen this chord. It was right there, and we're going to do it the same way. Right? So I just shift this 2 and 3, again, back to here. Now notice that the chord block is the same, the bass no changes. Chord block is the same, no changes. Chord block is the same, bottom no changes. So I have, right? Oh. So is that A minor with a C, A minor with an E in the bass, A minor with an A in the bass, and then A minor with a C in the bass again. All right, here I got a new chord. I have D, I have the note A, D, F, and notice that next to the D, it's got the number 4. So D minor is being played with that 4th finger, right, as opposed to like this. And that's going to happen really specifically because we need that 3rd finger to ready to play this note C. That's going to happen over here. So it's a little bit of foreshadowing. So D minor with D in the bass, D minor with A in the bass. And then, as we said, so this chord here is where we get that transition where, first of all, the 3rd finger was ready to play that C, but at the same time, the note A here, here, and here is all played with the 2nd finger. So that transition from D minor to A minor, you should notice that I never picked up the 2nd finger. Okay, so that's that first half of the song. Really never picking up fingers unless absolutely necessary. Second section kind of switches to a C major situation, right? We know this shape as our C major chord. So it goes from C and then the block of the chord, and then we play the note E and then the block of the chord. And this is like a G7 chord, but starting with D. And then adding on that 4th finger right there, the note D. See how it wasn't there before? So then it becomes there. So this is like, these two measures are like doing G7 like this, and then G7 like this. But never actually ever playing the G in the bass. And then back to these A minor shapes we know. Love this chord, right? D, A, B, F. Right? And then a proper G7. And then over here to C. Same thing, we saw this at the beginning of the form. Right? That's the same thing we saw over here. We've seen this before up over here. Remember, music is about repetition. Right? We saw that right there as well. This is the same G7 that we just saw over here. This is the G7 with the B in the bass that we saw over there. So the 4 is going to be the same here. And this is the C that started the section. And then it repeats back to the beginning. Okay, so today's purpose of the lesson, we're not really going to play the whole thing in the video with the rhythm. Today was just to figure out the chords. You want to get those chord blocks down, have your transitions ready so that when we do go and put the rhythm in, we're at least holding the right notes. So we had A minor with the C in the bass, E major with the B in the bass, E major with an E in the bass. Back to that E major with the B in the bass. Now it becomes E7 because D is in the bass. And then that same A minor with C in the bass. Now A minor with E in the bass. A minor with A in the bass. A minor with C in the bass. D minor, D is in the bass. When I say in the bass, by the way, I mean that first note with the stem going down, the note that's being played with P. We look at this as like a chord block and a melody, and then the lower note that's being played with B is the bass. So when I say in the bass, I mean that first note in the measure, right? So here we are right here with that D minor with A in the bass. Next line, it's A minor with C in the bass, E major with B in the bass, and then A minor with A in the bass. And as I'm going through those, you should see how I do the transitions, because the left-hand situation is not going to change in the next video lesson. The only thing that's going to be different is the execution of the right hand, and we have how it's written. And then we'll have 16A, where we'll do the same chords in arpeggiation, just like how we saw with 15 as block chords and 15A as arpeggiation. Okay, so then we can look at that second section, where we start with the C chord. So I see C chord with C in the bass, and the next one is going to be C with E in the bass, and then it's going to be G7 with D in the bass, and then it becomes G7 with B in the bass, but I'm going to add that fourth finger to the note D right there that we saw that, right? Then this is A minor with A in the bass again, A minor with C in the bass. Then this beautiful chord, we have D, A, B, and F. Right, it's like a B half diminished situation, but it doesn't really feel like the half diminished because the D is in the bass. Anyway, if you take a music theory class, we can talk about that then. G7 with G in the bass. C major with C in the bass. C major with E in the bass. D minor with D in the bass. Remember to use a fourth finger. A in the bass. G7 with G in the bass. G7 with B in the bass. Adding that fourth finger on the note D over there. And then ending with C chord. And then remember that D, C al fine, so then we end up going back to the beginning. Until you get to fine where it says end. Okay, so those are the chords for Prelude number 16, and what will be subsequently the chords that are arpeggiated in 16A. Use the time to go over those chords. Make sure those transitions are down. Follow along the fingers as you saw me doing them. Follow along the fingerings that are described in the paragraph above over here. This is page 58 and 59, Prelude number 16.